Hello and welcome to Can You Hear Me at the Back, the podcast about all things voice and communication.
Hey, Leon.
Hi, Aundrea.
So.
Yeah.
With a movement and a sound, tell me how you feel. That's very succinct.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's because of the soup.
Yes, the wonderful soup that you made.
I made wonderful soup. I mean, I can't call it wonderful.
I can call it wonderful, though.
I did now because you said wonderful,
Yeah.
but it's awkward.
Can you not call it wonderful because you made the soup? Is that why?
To me, it's just soup. That's how my soup usually turns out. It's your qualification of whether or not it's wonderful or not.
I feel like that's just like the American in me that I want to make everything more awesome than it really is.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I'm such a happy person.
Aundrea?
Yes.
In a sound and a movement, how are you feeling?
No.
Oh, there's like a hand gesture with that. I liked it.
Yeah, I got a little.
That wasn't the
bit.
sound that you made, but the hand gesture was.
It's because I wanted to yawn, but I was like, "Don't yawn on camera."
Don't yawn on camera. Nobody wants to see your uvula.
No, nobody wants that. I'm good. I feel like that's like my grandmother in the back of my head being like, "Don't yawn." I'm like, nobody wants to see you yawn. Nobody wants to see tiredness. That's not how my grandmother talks. I don't know whose grandmother that was.
Virginia. I don't know what's.
I don't know whose grandmother.
Or because when you're on
that
accent coach and you can't do your grandma's accent.
was. No.
Oh dear. So what are we talking about today?
We are talking about discourse analysis, conversational analysis, and Grice's Maxims.
That is a lot. Hold on. Aren't they all the same thing, sort of? Or Grice's Maxims are kind of part of discourse analysis, right?
Correct, yes.
And discourse analysis is a posh word for, like, listening to what people are saying.
Yeah. And analyzing it, but in a non-judgmental way.
Yeah, like on Lingthusiasm, fabulous podcast, listen to it.
Great podcast.
Lauren Gawne and Gretchen McCulloch, amazing. About linguistics, and they talk about, they've got merchandise that says, I'm not judging your grammar, just analysing it.
Yeah.
Which I quite like.
Yeah. And on another show, we could talk about the difference between descriptive grammar and prescriptive grammar, but we don't have, that's not today.
Let's do that, but not today. Today I think it's discourse analysis.
It is. It's discourse analysis.
Conversational analysis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, which bit are we doing? We're doing the words, we're doing the syntax.
Right. So you could, because there's a whole bunch of ways that you can get into that. You could talk about the phonetics of it, so just the sounds that people use in conversation. You could talk about the grammar of it. You could talk about the morphology of it, so the little bits. But today we're talking about the pragmatic, so we're talking about the social bit of all of that, which could include, aspects of grammar or semantics or things like that. But we're looking at it purely from a social, conversational perspective. Yeah.
So you can either like adhere to the rules or not, right? I say rules, maxims.
Yeah, so the idea is kind of like, it's a wonderful idea, that everybody wants to be in a conversation, and they want to be able to communicate. And the idea behind creating the ideal form of communication is this kind of cooperative theory. So the idea is that we, as social beings who want to communicate with other people, adhere to certain kinds of maxims or rules in order to best communicate what we want to say. Effectively.
Which kind of, yeah. And then you've got people like politicians who try not to be understood,
Yes.
right? So they try and make themselves as vague as possible so that they don't get caught out later on.
Yeah. And also so that they can't be positioned in a way of saying, but you said this and that was true then, because fundamentally language is based on context, and so the only way that we understand meaning is through the context of the other things around it, which is why language is quite difficult because something like a scone to you could be like a completely different scone to me because I have a different context for it than you would. I also have a different phonetic way of saying it.
Which we discussed
Yes.
in mimesis.
Yes.
So like the linguistic representation of what you actually mean,
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not that is the same as somebody else's.
Yeah.
And so if the context for your idea is different to the person with whom you're having a conversation, then you're unlikely to be understood in the way that you intended to be understood.
Correct.
And then also if you're taken out of context,
Mm-hmm.
that then somebody else can provide the context and then make it sound like you agreed or disagreed with something.
Yeah. Lawyers are very good at that.
Ah.
That is what lawyers do.
Feels like that's what lawyers are supposed to do.
Yeah. That's kind of.
But then
like
it's really annoying because it's one of those things that you always hear people say, but I didn't get to say what I wanted to say, and then when I tried to, they just twisted it.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, that's
accurate.
That's literally their job. But the weird thing about it is that it doesn't necessarily mean that people are heard and therefore justice prevails. It's just who's the best person at kind of twisting the argument sometimes.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like, at least.
Yeah. It's also taking an argument and making sure that it fits within the context that you are backing and that kind of thing.
Hey, wow, yes, that's really true.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not even the one that you're backing, but it's the one that will get you the outcome that is good for your client. Sometimes. Now, basically, I've not studied law. I would like to say that. Most of my law comes from Law and Order and other things, but we do study lawyers in linguistics because they're quite fascinating in terms of their language use. That's why too a lot of law students, at least in the U.S., start off as English majors or English majors. Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because here, the vast majority of people who go into law, and I'm saying this now, it might not be true, but this is my experience of those I know who are in law. When they first go to university and do undergraduate studies, they tend to do something like history. Rather than English.
I think, I think
lots of historians. They
always say, I think when they recommend, like, at the beginning of undergrad, when they're like, oh, if you want to go into law school, they're like 3 big ones. It's like English lit, history, and I can't remember what the other one is. But it's because it trains you how to think in a particular way about arguments and how to construct arguments.
That's interesting.
And also it makes you a better writer, and lawyers need to write a lot of stuff.
That's true as well. Mm-hmm. Gosh.
We talked a lot about lawyers in like a minute. But to bring it back, and I guess it's relevant in some way. I'm not flouting the relevant maxim yet, because I make everything relevant, so that's how I get around that.
Yeah, trying. Yeah.
But basically what it is what is implied by the statement that you're saying, and whether that implication, the implicature of the sentence or the question that you've asked, follows with the maxims that are in place for a conversation.
So what are the the maxims are the Gricean maxims,
The
right?
Gricean maxims, yes.
Who was a linguist in like the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you can Google him. There's loads of stuff about him. We don't need to explain about Grice. But so the Grice's maxims, there are 4 of them, right?
Yes.
And they are?
You've got quality, you've got quantity, you've got relation, and you've got manner. Relation, some people call it relevance, but relation, relevance,
so it's
same
like
thing.
relevant to or in relation to the question that was asked.
Correct.
Ah.
And then you have manner.
Manner from heaven. Sure. The Gricean maxim of manner from heaven.
Manner from heaven.
I mean, it's not that, but we'll see.
No.
So I've got examples here.
He does.
On
the whole sheet and everything.
On paper.
Good old paper.
So maximum of quality, an example. We've got. Why were you late last night?
My car broke down.
Like, that's not what I asked you.
It's not what I asked, no. So the quality is different, yeah. So I think of the quality as kind of being the how, in the sense that your response is answering the how of it. Yeah.
I mean, it does sort of follow the quality there, doesn't it, a little bit? Because you're like, why were you late last night? My car broke down.
Yes, but you have to jump to that conclusion.
That's
so it's
why
not
you were
something
late,
that-
but it wasn't like, yeah.
It's not something that splashes you in the face and you go, oh, you know what I mean? It's something that you kind of have to, you have to make the leap to go, oh, his car broke down, that's why he's late. You have to add another step in.
That's why the journey was delayed, etc., etc. Okay.
Yes. Whereas if you had something where it was like, why were you late last night? I left my house way too late and I missed the train. Yeah. I understand why you were late.
Yeah.
You left your house late and you missed the train. And normally when you ask the question of why were you late, you kind of want to figure out who you need to blame too.
Yeah.
So if it's my car broke down, you don't necessarily want to go, oh, so it's your fault that you're late, because it could be it might not be that person. It's not that.
But
person's
also,
fault
like, it doesn't tell you that the car broke. I mean, when did your car break down?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, did it break down 2 weeks ago and you haven't got it fixed, or did it break down on the way here? Like, I mean, it sort of presupposes that you were on your way.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
About presupposition.
Well, and it could even be that, like, your car broke down months ago and you therefore don't have a car until you had to take the train, but you're not used to taking the train and you got like, there's a whole nother story that could happen there. And so yeah, there are lots of things. This is what my father calls being pedantic.
yeah. No, I like that. I'm fine with that.
And he is like, Aundrea, this is why people don't like to have conversations with you, but they're important. So that's your quality maxim.
And then we've got quantity.
Quantity, yes. So your quantity is a very, very simple thing. It's just don't talk too much.
Oh, so don't like over-egg the pudding.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Oh, that's a British thing to say. I laughed, but I don't know what that means.
Because if you put too much egg into a pudding, it just tastes like egg.
What is it? So are we talking about
like a steamed pudding, basically like a sponge pudding.
So like a cake?
A cake.
Yeah, because you guys use pudding for lots of things.
Yeah, pudding is the thing. But you guys just use pudding for basically like mousse.
Yeah, for
and we call it mousse because it's a mousse. Whereas you could have all kinds of things that would be a pudding. See, the thing is, I mean, we shouldn't really get into pudding semantics, but the point about it is that with pudding comes from the idea that it was a boiled pudding, which had like suet in it and that sort of stuff, and it was actually like a sort of stodgy, hard, sort of like dumpling type thing that has been a thing for
ages,
centuries, and so that would always have been the dessert, like the sort of the afters. But it wasn't always sweet, and sometimes until they sort of put fruit in it and that sort of stuff. Sometimes it was like a plum pudding or whatever.
Right.
And then Christmas pudding comes out of that same sort of place. And then so because it was always the sweet, or it turned into the sweet.
Yeah.
After the savoury that you'd eaten, it then became sweet or whatever, and then anything that was sweet and eaten after a savoury became pudding. So that then it's pudding. And dessert, I think, comes from the French. Yeah. So, yeah.
Because I mean, we don't have time for this, but pies, that's a whole other thing.
Sure.
Because...
I mean, we have a pie or a tart.
Yeah, and we've got pies. We have tarts too.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, it's just not as common, I think. I think you're more likely to find a pie than you are to find a tart. Anyway.
I mean, I was teaching a group of students yesterday.
Yeah.
And a little bit like that part of the conversation there, that we just sort of went off on one about food. And I was talking about character choices and saying that ostensibly making character choices is like standing at a buffet. And you don't know what to choose because you haven't tried everything yet and you don't really know what to do. So what you should do is the general buffet thing, which is take one of everything. And then if you happen upon something that's particularly good, you can sort of either offset the things you didn't like on someone else's plate, which is often what I do. I'm like, I want to go over there. And then put something else on their plate that I didn't really like, but I noticed that they liked it. And then I'll take the thing that I really liked.
Right.
And always an extra goujon, because everybody likes a goujon. And then there were, like, the majority of the class understood what I was saying. There were a couple of people who were a bit like, I'm not sure really running with your buffet metaphor. And I was like, well, for those of you that aren't foodie, I literally don't know how to communicate with you, so you're just going to have to get on board.
Just get out and class.
So it's always come back to food. But anyway, so maximum of quantity, so not too much information. So if I were to ask you, what time do you work tomorrow?
I work at 2 p.m.
Right. So like succinct, nice.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah. So and you also you've got the quality and you've got the quantity. Yeah. Because you answered the exact question, and you answered it within a certain amount of time.
And didn't over the pudding.
Yeah.
As opposed to, do you have school tomorrow?
Yes. Oh yeah.
And you would answer.
I have classes all day, but I must go to the doctor when I'm finished.
Which is totally not relevant, Aundrea. I don't care you're going to the doctor. I mean, I care, of course I care. But like, why are you telling me?
And this is like a big thing. As we talked about before with like English second language speakers, is that sometimes kids, and it's a big cultural thing too, because we talked about like the weather. And if you were to ask somebody how, how's your day going, and this happens a lot, almost every time I go somewhere in the UK, it's like, how are you? Are you alright? And they always be like, oh, we're having great weather, aren't we? And you're just like, I asked you how you were, and you just went and talked about the weather. It's like, that has nothing to do with what you...
It totally is.
It has
because
nothing to do
the
with
weather
what
for us dictates and is a sort of response to the way that we feel.
Yeah.
So our emotional state is very, very much linked to meteorology. I'm not entirely sure why.
Which is very sad, because it's you've got terrible weather.
That's why we always feel a little bit under the weather. A little bit chilly. Is it chilly in here? No, I'm going to put the heating on, so it's definitely not.
It's not.
But it's nice and toasty. But we do have this sort of. I think that's why we grumble a lot.
Yeah.
Because it is always a little bit sort of miserable.
It is. It's always like a little bit cold, but it's not. It's not cold enough that you want to go put on more clothes. It's just cold enough that makes you
sweaty.
Yeah. It's just cold enough that you're a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And then.
Welcome to the UK.
And then you have a cup of tea, and it makes everything better.
Yeah. Well, yes, that's true.
It does. It does.
I think that's why we like tea, because it warms you up.
It does, and the inside, and then they become a lot more congenial after a cup of tea. I've noticed that.
This is very true. This is very true.
It is.
So last time we solved social injustice, and this time we've solved British sort of malady. I mean, we haven't really solved it. We've just pointed it out.
But isn't that part of the bringing the unconscious to the conscious?
Wow.
So it's okay. Like, if that's part of learning, is that you start to do what you know unconsciously, and then part of learning is making it conscious, making you aware of it,
and how competent you are,
and how
Well, there you go.
Boom.
Learning theory as well.
We're doing really well. So so quantity is about talking too much. Yeah.
That's weird. That we just talked about quantity and then talked too much.
And then talked way too much. And we plotted relevance too at a certain point. Because that's our next one. Our next maxim is the maximum relevance.
So if I were to say, how's the weather today? And you were to say, it's rainy and it's cloudy, which it actually isn't, it's quite beautiful. That would be totally relevant to the conversation. As opposed to, how are you feeling? And it's been a bit rainy. Like, what? Which to a Brit makes absolute sense. But to somebody who is non-British.
So my next question, I feel like as an artistic person, my gut instinct is to go, oh, you feel a little bit rainy or blah, 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 but you have to a little bit rainy, a little bit cloudy. And a Brit would go, no, it is rainy and cloudy. Like, it's separate, but that is what I'm talking about. That it's absolutely separate.
Yeah, because we're not conscious that that's the thing that we do. I mean, kind of are, but not really.
No. Yeah, but then...
It is true, though.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Oh, it's been a bit damp recently, isn't it?
Yeah. I find it especially true within, like,
relevance.
older generations. Because that's where I tend to have it, where I went to a friend's house and her father, I said, he was like, hello, Aundrea, how are you? And I was like, oh, I'm great, how are you? And he's like, yeah, we've been having lovely weather lately. And I was like, I don't really, great. Okay. Because as an American, that's not how we greet each other. And it's also completely irrelevant.
I mean, it's sort of irrelevant. On the surface, it's irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
But he's actually answering the question.
See, and it has
it's
to be...
It's not flouting quality and quantity.
It's implied.
It's implied.
You've got the implicature. Yeah. Which you have to know. But you have to know that it's there. Otherwise,
but it's cultural, right?
Irrelevant. Absolutely. It's cultural, it's linguistic, it's, you will find, there... And you know those like lists, they've got like websites with like lists of idioms in different languages, and some of them are quite strange if you translate them into English. And it's like, if the dog is left on Tuesday, then Monday morning you will be broke. And and you're just like, I don't understand. The implicature behind it, the implied meaning is lost once you translate it to a different language, and part of that has to do with the way that the intimate way in which that language has to do with that word. It could be like the history of the word and all that other stuff. But it could also be that they have a different way of talking about money that somehow has to relate to a dog, which is all contextual. Yeah. It's all information that you don't have. And so when you look at it, you're just like, dogs, money. Do I need money to have the dog? Is that why I'm broke? Because I spent all of my money trying to get the dog, and now it's gone? I don't know.
How can you possibly?
You can ask.
That's true.
You could ask. So that's a long way of doing relevance.
Relevance or relation.
Or relation, yeah.
And then the last one is manner, from heaven. So if I were to ask, where was the professor when class ended? And then the response would be something along the lines of, she left class and went straight to her office. So the professor left the class and then went to her office. I mean, that's... Yeah. It's clear, it's brief, it's orderly.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, it answers the question. It's all good.
Rather than something like, oh, how's Emily? Oh, Emily's, how she always is.
Yes.
Well, like, what does that mean? Because she might be different to you than she is to me.
Yeah, we're getting back to that Plato and the imagery and what is usual to you is not usual to me. What does it mean? Yeah. That and manner tends to be about vagueness. It's one of those things that, like, again, it's a very big cultural thing. But I had this with my mom and my sister. But if you were to ask us, how's it going? Right? So, somebody outside of my family would have no idea what that means. But that is our very, like, New York way of saying, like, I'm not great, but I'm not bad. Like, but that's all in that.
I mean, if you were to say not great, not bad, then in British English, if you said, like, not great means bad, and not bad means good.
Oh my gosh, yes!
So, like, we'd be like, so what? So you're not great, but you're not bad? That means you're kind of okay.
Yeah.
I mean, if you toss it up either way, it basically comes out as average.
Average.
Rather than... But the idiom of both of those things means the opposite.
Yeah.
Across the other side of the pond.
That's so weird.
Or both sides of the pond.
That actually explains a lot.
Not great.
So not great is...
If someone said to me, how was the show last night?
Yeah.
And I said, not great. They'd be like, oh my God, what was wrong with it? And then I'd have this, like, long list of stuff that was dreadful.
Oh.
And then if they said to me, oh, how was the show last night? I'm like, oh, not bad.
Yeah.
They'd be like, cool. So what was good about it then?
Oh.
Yeah, it's literally the opposite.
Yeah, because if I were to say not great, I wouldn't mean that it was bad. I just mean that, like,
That it was okay, but it wasn't great.
yeah. And if I were to say not bad, yeah, then yeah, that's exactly. It's the exact opposite.
It'd be worse, but it's not okay, but it's kind of slightly less good than okay. But
Yeah.
it's not awful.
Yeah, but you know, it's really weird. If I use it within the context of somebody asking me how am I, it's like, how are you today, Aundrea? Not bad. Then
Yeah, then it kind of means good. Yeah, you don't even stick to your own idiom.
No.
Livid.
But you know what? I'm
Bi-curious? What?
No, I was gonna say bicoastal, but that's totally not the right word. That's totally not the right. What am I? What am I?
Yeah.
Trans.
You are bi-Atlantic.
Is that what it's a transcontinental?
Transcontinental.
No.
Intercontinental. I don't know what you are. Somebody tweet us and let us know what Aundrea is. Wow. So we've had
Yes.
quality,
Yeah.
quantity, relation, and manner.
Yes.
And it can be used for like comedic effect as well, right?
Yeah. Normally, if you flout something, it's either being sarcastic or it's being just bold-faced funny.
Like if someone says, "Can I go to the toilet?" and you're like, "I don't know, can you?"
Yes, because the implied question is, well, if you were to take it on the surface level, what you're asking is,
May I?
may I? But you're being quite
May I have
pedantic.
permission to leave the room so that I
Yes.
can go and use the facilities?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I would say that is that would be body quantity. Yeah. I would say quantity. Quality, not quantity. The cues, the cues really get to me.
Quality, not quantity.
Because you're not flat in quantity.
No, it's
you're
not quantity
answering.
because it's answered and it's not extra.
Yeah.
So it's just.
But the quality of it is not right.
But you change the context of what can means.
Mhm.
Can I?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, am I able to rather than may I?
Yeah.
So you're changing the context of what the conversation is.
Yeah.
And
And
or like people saying, "Could you carry that for me?"
Yeah, I could.
And you're like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
And then you don't because they haven't actually asked you,
Yeah.
or you've insisted
Well,
that they
because
haven't. They have asked you.
That big thing about like the pluperfect, no, the conditional, which is the tense of if could, right? Which does not necessarily mean that you are asking the question, but you are asking about the possibility of something. Which means that technically I don't really need to give you an answer because it's a hypothetical.
Yeah.
If I could do this, then could this happen?
It's the if command in Excel, isn't it? If this happens, count if, sum if.
Some if.
Oh, for those of you who hate Excel,
I'm not a fan of Excel.
I mean, sure.
I lie and say
It's
that
all
I can do it on
relevant.
my resume.
I mean, I actually can.
See?
I love a bit of Excel. Spending all those years working in the city. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Grice's Maxims,
Crazy.
conversational analysis, discourse analysis, not really saying what we mean,
Implying what we mean.
implying what we mean,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore sort of social graces and kind of assumed understandings that then become very culturally specific, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and if you take culture, I mean, you can make it culturally, then it could also be regionally, and then it could also be even smaller than that, and it could be idio, it could be just between, like, you and, say, well, I mean, there are certain things that I say to myself that I know that I'm like, if I say that out loud, everyone would think I would be crazy, but also, like, nobody would really get that, because that's a tie to something else that I've tied something, so it wouldn't be relevant to anybody else, but it's completely relevant to me. I do that with my students too when they've got like speeches sometimes, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't really understand what that means," and I was like, "That's because it's not for you; it's for the character." And I was like, "So if you haven't connected with it, then of course you wouldn't know what that meant because you don't have that memory.
Yeah,
it's not relevant for you. But if you're in it, then it would be relevant because you have that connection."
That's a lot of conversations that I have with students.
It is.
A student yesterday came up to me and said, "I don't understand why this character says there are no arsonists in my family." in Strindberg's Miss Julie. And I said,
contextualize that.
does she have arsonists in her family? And he was like, well, not really. I mean, her mother did burn down the house. Okay, I've answered my question, bye. And just then walked away. I was like, okay, bye. So sometimes you have to kind of remember what the context is for it to actually make sense again.
Yeah, you have to build the relevance too. Right, because a lot of times, especially when you're like reading something, or you're watching something on television or a movie, there are certain things that are already implied before you get there. Yeah, this is why I tell a lot of people about like if you're watching something, a lot of times you've got to kind of figure out. Okay, you kind of the big thing about first scenes is that yes, we're on planet Earth. Yes, we're in this time period.
Yeah.
Yes, things are working relatively normal. So if I walked outside, I could see a scene like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's all setting up the context so you can know whether what they're saying is relevant or what they're saying is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you don't understand that, then the rest of the language, the rest of the whole story, and even the things that they say to each other will make no sense because it's not relevant.
Yeah.
But we also just solved like postmodernism in like 5 seconds too.
I mean, we should definitely get more listeners. What have you learned during this podcast episode, now that we're actually sitting in the dark?
We are sitting
Let's see if I can brighten the light on my computer so we get a little bit of light from one side. Here we go. Now we look like we're speaking.
Wait, I can't. Do I have light?
There we go.
I don't know
Sort
if that
of
did anything. What did I learn? So I learned. Oh gosh. I feel like I always say that I learned that language is complicated, but you know what? I learned this time is that culture is integral to the language and the way that we communicate with other people. That could be a run-on sentence. But...
I thought you flouted quantity there.
What did you learn, Leon?
I learned that quantity and quality are difficult to differentiate sometimes.
They really are.
And that there are things, every time we do a podcast episode, there are things that we start to articulate that I intrinsically understand, but I didn't really think about it in those terms before. So sometimes the linguistic things just kind of make so much sense because I know I do them all the time, as do you, and as do lots of people that I work with and speak to. Almost everybody does, but then there's this kind of formalizing of those ideas and those things, and then it becomes kind of just really satisfying. I'm finding it really satisfying to kind of to realize there are things that I already knew that I didn't know that I already knew.
Yeah.
And I keep coming up against that or experiencing that as we're talking, which is really nice, and I'm feeling quite proud, feeling quite inspired.
You're going to go out and write a book now?
I mean, it's a work in progress, the book writing thing. We'll see. If you want to contact us about anything we said in the podcast, you can reach us on Twitter at CanYouHearPod.
Or on Instagram at CanYouHearMePodcast.
Or you can search for us on Facebook and on YouTube.
Or email us at canyouhearmeattheback@gmail.com.
You can find me, Leon, on Twitter at Leon Trayman.
Or me, Aundrea, at Aundrea Fudge on Twitter.
Please support the podcast by subscribing as a patron on our Patreon site.
The link is in the show notes.
To keep the podcast advertisement-free, as well as get access to cool extra stuff, discounts, bonus episodes, as well as supporting ongoing voice research funding as well. Okay, love you, bye!